Hello everyone and welcome back to Creation Myths. In this video, I'm going to show you a short clip from a debate that took place on May 13th, 2026 between evolutionary biologist Dr. Zach Hancock and former Creation Ministries International and Answers in Genesis writer Paul Price. The topic was something about mutations, but that doesn't really matter because this was actually a debate about genetic entropy. That's what everyone acknowledged from the top that we were talking about. It was a debate about genetic entropy. So very briefly, genetic entropy is the idea proposed in a 2005 book by young Earth creationist Dr. John Sanford that all genomes are degrading due to the accumulation of slightly harmful yet unselectable mutations that degrade genomic function in some way, but have a sufficiently small effect that natural selection cannot weed them out, cannot operate to reduce the frequency of these mutations. And the accumulation of these mutations makes extinction inevitable, right? There's nothing natural selection can do to stop this accumulation, right? That's the idea of genetic entropy. The key underlying idea here is that in terms of how natural selection operates, there's no difference between strictly neutral mutations that have literally no effect and slightly harmful mutations with effect sizes below the selection threshold, which means that nothing can stop those slightly deleterious mutations from building up. And by the way, deleterious doesn't mean they're deletions, it means harmful, right? So nothing can stop those slightly harmful mutations from building up, and eventually the species goes extinct. Now, young Earth creationists use this concept to argue that humans must have been created recently because due to genetic entropy, we can't possibly have survived evolutionary timescales. Now, this is entirely wrong. Zach and I, Dr. Zach Hancock and I, actually co-authored a paper on this that was published in 2024 that shows exactly how Sanford's math is wrong. And we've both covered this a ton in quite a bit of detail on our respective channels. A bunch of those links are going to be down below if you're interested. So definitely check down below. You can get like the actual math, the more detailed version of why this is all wrong. But let's get back to this debate that happened as I record this a few days ago. Rather than try to walk Paul and the audience through the math, in his cross-examination section, right after Paul's opening, Zach did something really interesting. And by the way, the format of the debate was opening, cross-exam, opening, cross-exam. So Paul did his opening first, then Zach did a cross-examination, and he did a really cool thing that led to Paul conceding the debate right then and there, like literally within the first 20 minutes of the debate. Paul did not realize that that's what he did, but that's exactly what he did. So I won't spoil it. Let's watch, and then we'll come back and we'll make sure we're all on the same page in terms of what happened and why it matters. So check it out.
Okay, so Paul, is my understanding, or is your understanding of effective neutrality that selection cannot act? That seems to be the way that you presented it in your presentation, that if it's effectively neutral, selection can't act on it. Is that true?
Well, the drift barrier is a theoretical cutoff point where basically the effective natural selection is negligible with by comparison to the effective genetic drift.
Okay.
When you're below that point.
Okay, thank you. So under that logic, then, if I were to give you 3 simulations, all of which are either truly neutral or effectively neutral, and the effectively neutral ones only differ by their effect magnitude, by their effect direction. So one is slightly beneficial, one is slightly deleterious, and then the third one is truly neutral. When you look at these 3 distributions, under your idea, these 3 distributions should look exactly the same, right? Do they look the same to you?
So if I'm understanding, you're saying the first one is not neutral in any sense. The second one is effectively neutral, and the third one is strictly neutral. Is that correct?
I'm saying there are 2 simulations here that are effectively neutral, one that is slightly deleterious, one that's slightly beneficial, but both effectively neutral. And then the third one is truly neutral. can you tell by looking at these allele frequency trajectories which is which?
I mean, yeah, you're saying that the effectively neutral ones aren't behaving identically to a strictly neutral mutation. Is that your point?
That's my point, yes.
Yeah, I can
So in
definitely
that
grant
sense,
that.
it's not that drift is not overpowering selection. Selection is still adding a bias here, right?
Well, it's certainly overpowering. That's the difference. That's why
Is
it's
it?
effectively
So can
neutral.
you look at which of these and tell me which one is slightly beneficial? Can you tell which one it is?
Yes. So again, the point you're trying to make here is that you're saying effectively neutral mutations aren't identical in their effect with a strictly neutral mutation. So you're saying there is some amount that selection acts on it. It's not literally a zero amount. Is that correct?
Yeah, so
Okay.
selection is in fact acting and differentiating these mutations,
Right.
even though they're effectively neutral, right?
It's acting, but not in a way that is going to overpower the effect of drift. That's
Is
the
it?
whole reason
So
we
if you
have the
look at,
difference.
so can you tell me which of these again are the slightly beneficial one? Just A, B, C, A, B, or C.
So what are you showing me on the y-axis there? Is
That's the
that
frequency. Sorry. So these are 100 different alleles, and these are their allele frequency trajectories
okay?
across 400 generations.
So I would expect that the beneficial ones would increase in frequency, the deleterious would decrease. So I'm going to say A would be beneficial and B would be deleterious.
So
Did I get that right?
B is strictly neutral. C is the one that's deleterious. So
Okay.
notice how only one mutation in C increased in frequency. So based on these graphs, does it seem fair to say that you need proportionately fewer beneficial, effectively neutral mutations to compensate for slightly deleterious ones? Would you need fewer of them based on these graphs?
Sure.
Okay. What time are we at, Donnie?
You just hit the 3-minute and 30-second mark. So you got about a
Okay,
minute
cool.
and a half.
Okay, so under your argument then, if we need much fewer beneficial mutations to compensate for the deleterious ones, is it true that having a preponderance of deleterious mutations necessarily means that you're going to lose fitness if you need much fewer beneficial ones to compensate?
No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. And I think you proved that with your sim, because your sim had 100 times more deleterious than beneficial, and yet it grew without
No,
limit. So yeah, it definitely
I'm
does not necessarily mean that. It depends on your parameters.
sure. So under these parameters, under these effectively neutral parameters, it seems like you would need fewer effectively neutral beneficials to compensate for deleterious.
Sure.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so that was the cross-examination that I wanted everyone to see. Did everyone follow what happened there and why it mattered? So let's go back to genetic entropy. The whole point of genetic entropy, the foundation of the entire argument, is a particular bit of population genetics fan fiction. That slightly deleterious mutations are unselectable and therefore evolve in populations in exactly the same way as strictly neutral mutations. That's it. It's that you can't select against these slightly harmful mutations, therefore they build up and they build up and build up, and ultimately extinction is going to occur. If that's wrong, if those mutations actually are selectable, which means that the process of natural selection can reduce their frequency over time, then genetic entropy doesn't exist. And what did we just see in that section of the debate, in that cross-examination? Paul conceded exactly that that foundation of the idea of genetic entropy is wrong. He conceded that strictly neutral mutations and slightly harmful mutations actually operate differently with regard to natural selection. Zach did this great thing here because the visuals really hammer this point home. Zach provided 3 graphs showing how the frequencies will change for strictly neutral mutations, slightly deleterious mutations, and slightly beneficial mutations, with the latter two both having fitness effects below the selection threshold. Now, according to genetic entropy, those 3 cases should be indistinguishable from each other. But that's obviously not the case. They're obviously different. It was clear visually in the graphs, and Paul acknowledged that they're different. Selection does affect the slightly harmful and slightly beneficial mutations. They don't just operate under random genetic drift. Which means, in that moment, when he admitted that those graphs are different and therefore the evolutionary trajectories of those different types of alleles are different, Paul conceded that genetic entropy isn't real. He didn't realize that he did that, but in that moment, the debate was over. And this was a debate that lasted over 2 hours, and this happened within the first 20 minutes. That was it. So now, anytime a creationist brings up genetic entropy, you could refer back to those few minutes from that debate and say, look, Paul Price, this guy is written for CMI, he's written for AIG, he is one of the spokesmen for genetic entropy. He admitted that slightly deleterious mutations are selectable, which is obviously the case. So genetic entropy is wrong. If you disagree, creationist, take it up with your own side. Get your argument in order and get back to me with data that shows that those specific types of mutations, those specific alleles that have small effects, show me directly that they aren't subject to selection. Because again, Paul Price admitted that they are. And you have the graphs, the data don't lie. So thank you to Zach for this extremely illuminating moment from that debate. And thank you to Paul for conceding that genetic entropy is fake. And thank you all for watching. Before you go, please remember to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and if you want immediate access to my pre-recorded videos, consider becoming a channel member. Thanks again for watching, and don't get fooled.